Georgia players keep getting arrested for speeding, and I wanted to know why. Since 2023, over 25 players have been cited. That's after a crash killed a teammate and staffer. Kirby's tried everything: suspensions, fines, even driver's ed. And yet, it keeps happening. So I called up JC Shelton from UGA Football Live, a guy who covers the team every day.
I think the headlines almost paint the picture of, man, these guys at Georgia are just all criminals. And I see where some, have painted that picture to where this is a bigger issue, to where culture-wise, this is a Kirby Smart problem, this is a Georgia Bulldogs problem, something's wrong with the culture.
There's a loop around campus where guys literally race each other.
And people don't understand where Athens is. The loop is where they're getting arrested, really. I don't street race, but Max, if I was going to street race, man, and I don't because I value my life and I think my wife would kill me if the driving wouldn't, there might not be a better place to street race.
Before NIL, they drove mopeds. Now they're driving Chargers and Lambos. But is that the only reason it's happening? Is it a culture issue? Has Kirby Smart done anything? Let's find out.
Ever since that crash, the spotlight has been on this program that killed Chandler LaCroix and Devin Willock, a player and a staffer. And ever since that incident, and there have been driving-related incidents before, plenty, right? Easily searchable. Ever since that, the national media spotlight has been huge on that. So any other incidents from it, I feel like that it's blown up, and I think there's been a concerted effort by Georgia to answer this with different things.
Let's rewind on the details of that crash. It was January 15th, 2023. It was late night after Georgia's national championship celebration. Devin Willock, an offensive lineman, and Chandler LaCroix, a recruiting staffer, were killed in a single car accident. Police said the car was going 104.2 miles per hour. LaCroix's blood alcohol level was 0.197, over twice the legal limit. She was racing another SUV driven by Jalen Carter, who pled no contest to misdemeanor charges. Prior to the crash, UGA continued to allow LaCroix to drive recruits, even though she had 4 speeding tickets in the past 6 years. Since the crash, January 2023 to April 2025, there have been over 25 known incidents involving speeding, reckless driving, or DUIs. I asked JC if the volume of these incidents have increased, or has it just been a byproduct of the increased national media attention on the Georgia football program?
20 or more, actually more than 20 since the crash in 2023. I think there is more. And I think driving related is definitely, there's been an uptick there. All right. I think that's provable. I think I tried to tie it into the availability of really fast cars for these guys at this time who let's just be honest, couldn't afford it before NIL. I think that's what I'm tying it to. Now, the headlines as far as nationally, I just think that in the past, where it might just be posted on your fan sites or your local media coverage, it's not getting picked up on the West Coast. It's not getting picked up in the Midwest. And now, since it's a notable thing and that crash is what put that spotlight on the situation, it's getting run everywhere, right? The New York Times is doing a piece on it. When the latest incident, when Nitro Tuggle was arrested for going 107 miles an hour, when Marcus Easley was arrested for another incident, the New York Times wrote a post on it. Now, would that have happened if this crash wouldn't have happened? No. And that doesn't take, that's not saying, well, this isn't a big issue. It obviously is. And I can't wrap my head around exactly why, but something tells me, man, I think it's the availability for the cars. I really do.
These charges range from reckless driving to speeding 30 miles an hour and over above the speed limit, all the way to expired registration and suspended licenses. And a key point in this that I hadn't thought before I sat down and chatted with JC, most of the incidents involve young players, often redshirt freshmen or new transfers into the program. So why does this keep happening? That's the question we all want to know. After reading the articles, chatting with JC, seeing other clips, my brain goes down 4 lanes. 1, environment. 2, NIL money. 3, not that it's his fault that these kids are getting in the car, but you got to look at Kirby Smart. And 4 is the locker room. So 1, the environment. JC told me something that I didn't know as a national college football guy. In Athens, on campus at Georgia, there's something called the loop where most of these incidents have happened.
It is just wide open. I've heard stories of these guys timing themselves who can get around the loop faster.
So I asked him what makes it a speed trap for all this to go down.
Well, from my experience and going to school there for years and then spending, working in the community after as well, there's not a huge police presence there. 1, right? And then 2, if you're not, let's say game day, obviously it's crazy, the traffic. You don't really get in much traffic there at all. And you could take a whole loop and see 2 cars, depending on what time you're going. Okay. So, and you can go around the entire, campus, right? So it's literally a loop. Think of a loop around the University of Georgia. Just think about it.
Just called a circular
Yes.
Self-contained loop around campus?
Yeah, we're talking about Loop 10. So, and that to me, that's why I say it's just, I can see why they're doing it. Like if they're like, all right, I'm gonna go race you. You got your Challenger, I got my Corvette. Let's see what we can do. I guess that would be the place that I would pick. And I've heard stories about these guys timing themselves through it, and that's so dumb, right? It's such, we all look at it from our perspectives as that's a dumb mistake. In reality, these dudes are kids, man. These are kids with the G on their chest. It's a massive thing. They don't pay for hardly anything when they go into shops or what have you, man. I mean, the community around them, they love Georgia football. It just means more. It's not, the SEC didn't coin that term because of the coaches, the players, or anything. It's just how much the fans feel about these guys, right? So they're kings here. So I think that might play a part in it too, especially if you're a 5-star prospect getting a good check, and you're a little bored. It's after practice, you're working hard still. School's over, and you got a really fast car and nothing to do.
2, NIL money. So we've established that the loop is the perfect layout for all this to go down. It's also well known that NIL has allowed 18-year-olds to get their hands on a certain level of vehicle that they weren't able to touch before, at least not legally. So I asked JC, was this an issue before NIL?
And to me, it always kind of boils down to the cars that are different. See, back before NIL, largely, right? Some guys came in different situations, but largely, a lot of the football players, Aaron Murray is a guy who everybody can recognize nationally. He'll tell you, mopeds were the move, man. It's a small community. The campus is so easily accessible, and all these guys were there. Even if you're living off campus, you're really close. So they would get mopeds. That's how they get into practice. That's how they're getting to the football facility. You didn't have these issues, and now it comes to the point to where these guys are getting cars, and more mistakes are piling up. I think the larger thing is like, what do you do? Because to me, there's not really an answer to that. And I know it's weird to not have an answer, but, I think that's kind of at least the feeling I'm getting from the fan base too, is like, well, we've said everything. Kirby Smart has suspended guys. Trevor Etienne, starting running back, missed the Clemson game. It was a huge matchup. It was a top 10 matchup. He suspended him for that. It was his first game in a Georgia uniform. It was going to be a huge deal for him. So suspended from that. These guys are getting docked NIL money, right? So that's also a good move, I think, right? Right? Make these guys have so many consequences to that action to where it doesn't happen, but still it's not working.
3, Kirby Smart. I'm not saying this is Kirby Smart's fault, but you do have to look at, hey, what actions is the head coach taking to try to minimize this? From my chats with JC and what you read online, it's really 2 lanes. Suspensions for ETN, Tuggle, and Easley, and for NIL fines, 6 figures worth of withheld payments. Kirby's also brought in defensive driving courses, in fact, the same people that taught his own kids, to bringing in former players to come in and talk about the situation.
Like, for example, we had John Ledbetter on. He's in the NFL, played at Georgia, and we had him on last fall, and we talked a little bit about it, and then came to find out that he had been one of the players that Georgia and Kirby Smart had invited in to talk to these guys, right, to try to explain to them, and he was a guy who got suspended at Georgia, to explain to them how it can hurt your career, how it can hurt your team, and really you and your family. And unfortunately, even beyond just the crash, just like driving 107 miles an hour, like it's just impossible. Every time it keeps happening, you're like, what is going on here? But the reality of the situation, I think Georgia and this coaching staff have made a concerted effort. The athletic department has as well, teaching these guys classes. A lot of these kids, Kirby Smart talked about it, I think it was last week, about how these kids are getting into the program now, and some of these guys don't even have driver's license, right? And then they get to school, they get that NIL check, that first one, they can buy a car, and those cars are usually fast, okay? So you have this basically an uneducated driver, to be honest, with a really fast car in Athens.
Okay, so then is it a bigger cultural problem? Court documents allege that Georgia staffers regularly drank alcohol at Kirby Smart's residence during recruiting events. That part is not totally obscure. I don't have a huge issue with that. The problem is the court documents also say they drove families and recruits back to lodging in the school-owned SUVs. And I asked JC about it.
Got 100 bars within whatever square mile it is, and it's not long. Right. And these guys come on recruiting visits and sometimes have friends already at the school, so they got a place to stay, and then they're getting taken out. And let's all be honest here, in Athens, you're a football player, you're not getting ID'd. So that's one of the big concerns, I think, and it's a scary concern because so many bad things could happen. I don't know all the time they do, but they could. I do know that as far as the crash and what was all involved there, she was in an athletic department car at that time of night. after, obviously drinking. And I think that's a big change and a sobering moment for the staff. And like we kind of lost control of that as far as even her having a car available and using it at the time she did. So I think that's a noticeable change that they've put in place. And I think that's really the thing that came out of that beyond just, the focus and the spotlight and all the negativity that came and the pressure on the culture. But that's a noticeable change. Now, culture-wise, speaking of, and Kirby Smart, when he's asked about this, he doubles down on it's not a culture problem. I think this goes to a locker room thing and where these kids, where their heads at when they get in here in their first season, second season, and maybe they're not in a great spot as far as a starting role. They get bored, man. In Athens, there's only a few things to do, and people tell you it's probably to drink and drink for some of these kids, right? And I think that's a very big challenge that they've always faced, and I think major college programs across the country always face, especially it's college. I think culture-wise, as far as the winning mentality and stuff like that, Kirby Smart, like you said, it's built an amazing program from that standpoint. But again, I always go back to the player leadership thing, man.
The fourth factor, locker room, is something that I had not thought about until I sat down with JC. This is a huge piece of the puzzle, and because of the transfer portal, there's been more roster turnover, which means less stability in the locker room of homegrown guys who have rose up the ranks that know a certain standard and can remember past events and past speeches from former players about these incidents. And at a place like Georgia, you could make the argument that also leads to just less veterans in general to ultimately keep the locker room under wraps. Like back when I was playing, 4 years at USC, 1 year at Pitt. I can't reference the multiple years of leadership at Pitt, but at USC, every one of those teams had a different vibe because depending on who those senior leaders are, who those voices of impact are, it changes and has a ripple effect down to the younger guys. Some teams have better, older leadership. Other teams have weaker leadership that then allows those younger guys to get away with more. Obviously, Georgia's had tons of success on the field, so they do have an element of player leadership. But I'd be willing to bet, to say this whole thing differently, if it was not the transfer portal era and you didn't have the widespread player movement, and a lot of these guys go into Athens as true freshmen, and then I'll see you again in 4 and 5 years, and they were continually developed, and they were, again, homegrown guys, I bet less of these incidents happen. So it's not just NIL, it's also the transfer portal factor and the ripple effect that has on your roster and locker room makeup. Like we said, most of the guys getting in trouble are not starters. Etienne and Mondon Jr., those are the exceptions. The players who got in trouble most recently, Nitro Tuggle and Marquez Easley, barely saw the field in 2024. So what would actually stop this? If Kirby's doing everything he can, I asked JC about the police presence in Athens.
But I think at least the police presence, there's definitely an uptick. And ever since that crash, too. I mean, it was a really sobering moment, not only for the Georgia and the football program, the university, but also, the Athens police. And I'm not saying they're targeting these guys, but there's definitely an uptick in presence. And these police, they know what these guys like to do on the loop, right? So it makes it even more preposterous that you would still take the risk, right? So risky. But I don't want to say that there is no police present.
To me, the great outlier in all this is the loop. I keep coming back to the loop. Like, I played at 2 different schools, USC and Pitt, both city towns. They had nothing like the loop. And therefore, I can't see any of these, or we had some crazy stuff go down at USC. But these incidents, much harder to get away with in a city school. Shoot, Pittsburgh didn't even have left turn lanes, which is something that I didn't know as a West Coast guy. But it speaks to the fact that you can't get away with going over 30 miles an hour over the speed limit in a city school multiple times over and over again. I also asked JC about streetlights, basic streetlights, and if there's plans to add any.
Dude, streetlights would definitely, I think, help. Absolutely, right? Because then you're probably not getting up to 107 miles an hour. And that gives you just that speed alone that Nitro Tuggle hit. Not to belabor the point on him, I hope he bounces back. I really do. He's from all things considered, he's a good kid who made a bad mistake. But just being able to get up to 107 miles an hour is incredible. I don't care what car you're in. So, yeah, stoplights would be a good move, Max, and I would welcome that.
Well, thanks, dude. I appreciate the time. This was great. A lot of good little quotes there, and I'll dive in. I think, again, from a national perspective, you see the headlines, and you're like, how is this going on? I didn't even know the loop existed, so that was a good takeaway, and hopefully for everyone's safety, this shit stops, and for your platform, we're not talking about it anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I totally agree. It'd be good to move off the topic, but it seems like every time you already have, another one pops back up.
Let's hope for everyone's sake these incidents stop happening. But if you enjoyed this video, I appreciate it. Hit the like button down below. Subscribe to the channel as well. I'm coming out with short form content every single day, long form content 3 times a week. I'm Max Browne, college football analyst, former QB at USC and Pitt. And thanks for hanging out. See you next time.